This video is fair use under Section 107 of Copyright Act 1976. Now let the chaos begin.
We also got a UA Crimson Tide. Hello.
Hello. I'll let
Hi.
Outer Banks go first. Do you want me or
no, go
Outer
ahead.
Banks to go first?
Nope, go ahead. You're in.
So I had some questions regarding the neighbor that you interviewed, Bobby, on your channel. Because she made a lot of statements that seemed to be very third-hand information about what she had heard and things that were never really directly related to the case from her personally experiencing that. One of the things that stood out to me is that she said her sons were with you a lot when you were in the neighborhood. Do you remember that at all? Like her children?
I did her sons. Yes, her sons were out there. Down the street there was a church, and I got to meet her sons.
Okay.
Very nice people.
Yeah, it's just I found the way that she kind of inserted herself in the case to be kind of very, very odd. And because she created the Facebook group for Sebastian Rogers that Seth was using to field tips on, basically on day 2, and set up the neighborhood vigil. And then there were some other things that I began to notice later on down the line, such as the girlfriend of one of the sons was actually given the award out to Seth that he received on Sebastian's behalf from the American Farmers, the FFA award at the April 17th vigil. And it was really interesting to go back and look at that award presentation, because in that award presentation, I heard a lot of past tense being used. And at that time, I think the general consensus was it hadn't even been 2 months. So maybe that could be why are we using the past tense? But there was, and I know people have, things. I'm Team Sebastian first and foremost. Okay. But one thing that was very interesting that I think maybe people didn't realize is there was a cadaver search done by SF Investigates, and I think law enforcement was also present at some of that as well. And it was done April of 2025, and that report was released earlier this year. And one of the areas of interest seemed to be the retention pond, as well as some dogs also alerted on an area right outside the backyard of what would have been right behind Bobby's house. And it's also interesting to note that we talked about, there's a bunch of people noticed that law enforcement started to say that they were scaling back the search, and people started questioning, why are they scaling back the search? Is that something they may have found digitally, or do they have something to cause it to lead them to go in a different direction? However, I do find it interesting that back out on April the 3rd, we saw law enforcement coming right back out and wanting to search the areas of the cemetery and along Long Hollow Beach Pike. And then later, some security camera footage from the back of Kellen Lane was released that appears to show some movement of lights in the cemetery area at an odd hour of time, around 3 a.m. And I was just wondering, had you followed that at all, or followed I know you've been busy covering other cases, but were you aware of that? Or
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. All these follow-up places and all the places they searched around the Proudfoots homes, around their home, the development, the retention pond, along the pike there, the tree lines, all the places.
Were you aware of that cadaver dog search hit though?
Yeah, I mean, that's been talked about. It's been talked about.
Okay.
I mean, I don't, obviously they didn't find Sebastian.
Right.
My sources at the time were telling me, they're coming up with the theory that Sebastian did in fact leave the house, and possibility somehow, got over there to the side where the construction homes were. A lot of those homes being built, whatever like that, somehow fell in there somewhere. And eventually over time, possibly these homes get built and Sebastian's under one of these homes. I mean, I would think that, not necessarily that, I don't really like that theory, because obviously you're going to look around, you're going to, at the time when they did massive search, they did a massive search around.
Right.
For the first few days, they did a massive search. I mean, they were all along the area, going door to door. Yes, they asked almost every single resident, including Bobby, for surveillance footage and checking people's surveillance, and they were checking all in that the retention pond, along the pike, along, all the way down to the church, the creek, the riverbeds, that construction site, all over the place, the dumpsters, people's trash. I mean, they searched pretty much everywhere around there, and but then they also talk about waiting to the wintertime to do another search because of the trees and everything, the leaves, the trees.
Right. They had gone back out there and done. You could see when I went back out there and searched in the wintertime, there were new grid markers that were there were new ties that you could see where Ellie had gone back out there and grid searched it again. And that was yes, I'm local. Okay. I've been out there searching several times, and so they did actually go back out there, and there were grid searching.
Who did you search with? Just you?
I searched with SF Investigates. Okay. Some other locals, Stephen Crabtree, Fluminati, Cletus, and some other people that were local to the area.
So that subsequent search, and what month was that when you did it?
That would have been, I think that was February. And then we were also out there in September of 2024 as well. And then there's been others, like Crabtree was out there a lot more, doing both ground searching and searching by boat.
Did you go on people's properties, or were you what?
Most of the time we were across from beach, across from the high school in those wooded areas. And, one of the things that we uncovered is there were areas too that you couldn't really even see until the vegetation started growing, dying off in the wintertime, that were actually these shafts basically, where you could walk up on something and literally something the size of a man, that would fit a person, you could just fall straight down. And sometimes these shafts went down for, could go down for 100 feet, which I thought was pretty alarming to think about. If that ground's covered or if leaves are covering it at the time, then it's dark, you're not going to see anything like that. But
did you go along 258 down, like once you go along Long Hollow Pike, the intersection there, right past the school, and
Yeah.
going south, did you go along the left side there on the tree lines and everything?
Yes.
That area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we did, like, we marked our searches out with Cal Topo, so that we could, go back and follow up on things if we needed to, or if we saw anything,
Okay, so you did searches with some people, you named some names. We know those names, very critical of Seth, more aligned towards the Proudfoots and stuff. What's your position? What do you think?
I personally think that there is something to, so one of the things that was released at 12:18, or was it 12:18 camera footage, that came from 1030 Kellen Lane. It was 12:18 in the morning after Sebastian on the 26th. And I always wondered why Ellie went back and changed the area of the missing poster to say in the area of Stafford Court, right? The wording to me on an official poster is very different. It's very important. They're very intentional when they say that, get that wording. So I thought, when I looked at that camera footage, I was recently revisiting another case where the Turpin children, when they escaped, and you looked at that camera footage, the way that the pixelation and the angle of the camera could make it to where the person could run by and you weren't even really seeing it till later on, which would account for, why it would be hard to find someone on a camera if they're wearing all black in a neighborhood that isn't really lit up very well at night, which I'm sure you saw, and is intentionally trying to not be seen on camera. So I think that given the fact that Sebastian did have a history of sneaking out his desire for friendship, I think that he was possibly lured out under false pretenses of someone wanting to be his friend. He maybe had mistaken their intentions and something went amiss. Maybe not intentionally, that something had, like, they set out to harm Sebastian and it went from there, but that something could have gone wrong. And then, from that point, they had to potentially cover up something that was accidental, maybe, that turned up, to
lured out by who though? And be like what?
I'll be specific. I think that because of their insertion, the over insertion of, when I looked back and I saw just how much, because I actually talked to Bobby after you did, and she actually worked a lot with Mob Crew at putting out the theories of the jammers, and that there were jammers that were being used, and Mob Crew kind of took off with that theory of jammers and a potential, like, free trial run of an abduction in a 3 a.m. car. And so when I was talking to her, I did not realize that her involvement from so early on, and the involvement of Autumn. And I'm like, why is this person that claimed that they never knew Sebastian, why are they so overly invested to the point where they're scheduling the vigil, right? The neighborhood vigil. Why are they, along with a girlfriend of one of her sons, creating the Sebastian Facebook group? That Sebastian Facebook group was the source for a lot of the rumors about Katie and Chris that were put in this lawsuit. It was also the group that, when you were interviewing Seth in front of that, on that search that was, like, at the park that was, like, 200 miles away or whatever.
Jackson,
yes,
Tennessee area.
that was this, right when you were interviewing Seth, he said, you're like, where should they send the tips? Seth directed them to send the tips to that Facebook group that was being run by Bobby, and then it became, and Autumn, the girlfriend, as well as Autumn's mom, as well as Autumn's aunt. And, I'm kind of like, that's a lot of, in hindsight, thinking back on that, I'm like, that's a lot of power and trust to put in some strangers to field tips on where your missing son is. Especially if you don't have social media. I would want control of that. I would want to know what tips are coming in. And especially when you're running a Facebook group, you're also in control of what the posters, or who are these anonymous posts are that are being created on Facebook. And you can actually be the anonymous poster, so to speak.
Yeah,
and therefore push a
the
narrative.
Yeah, the people around the group can also see who's posting.
Exactly. And it's like, what better way to control a narrative than to be, and also be able to figure out what is actually known about that, than to be the controller of a Facebook group. Especially when the dad is directing people to send the tips to that Facebook group. I've always found that very odd. And then when I looked at, like I said, when you take into consideration her giving out the FFA award, some of her public statements that she mentioned, the girlfriend Autumn mentioned about, working with the autistic teens at Beach High School, of which Sebastian was, her presence in the neighborhood due to having a boyfriend that lived there. And, it begs the question of, did Sebastian know her from school and from FFA, and maybe have a crush on her that maybe could have upset somebody, like a boyfriend that lived in the neighborhood? Like, did he think that she was maybe his genuine friend? I just find it, whenever someone fully inserts themselves in the way that I saw her trying to create this narrative and push the narrative the way that I saw her doing it behind the scenes, even, it always gives me great pause, especially when they claim that they don't know who that person is. Then when I go back and look at the timeline, for example, like the timeline that she gave you on your show, unfortunately, she has her sons witnessing things that they possibly could have never witnessed, because the video evidence from the search itself says that the dogs jumped in the retention pond at 7:54. According to the dispatch audio, that's when the dog is seen jumping into the retention pond. However, Bobby says that she wasn't made aware of anything regarding Sebastian being missing until her son had left to go for work that morning, saw that something was going on, which would have required, as you know, Kellen's a straight shot out of the neighborhood. So that would have required somebody to make the turn onto Stafford Court, figure out what house is going on, realize that Sebastian actually lived there, and inquire further out, right, as to what the commotion was, and then call back to his mom. But according to her son leaves at 8 o'clock, or approximately 8 o'clock, to go out of the neighborhood, tries to call her, and then calls one of the other sons, that's a twin, gets in touch with him. Then they go out searching for Sebastian. However, no car leaves that household or in front of that household until well after the dog has been passed there. like that dog is long jumped in the neighborhood, like in that pond. And she says that her sons watched the dog jump into the pond. It wasn't possible. Because also there was at 8:30 a.m. is where the first scented dog arrives on scene. And that was a scented bloodhound that arrived on scene. And it was given a pillowcase, is my understanding, was the scented article that they gave to that dog. So you can, in that footage from 10:30 Kellen, you see the 2 cars that were out there, which belonged to the sons. So 8:30, her sons had never left. So her story is already disproven right there. In that 8:30 footage, you see the dog coming in and following this path line that was very similar to the path line that the shadow person or shadow figure at 12:18 followed. The SF pointed out, and it took like a lot of people watching that video to realize that that was actually a person at 12:18. And many times of watching that video footage over. So then when I go back and look at it, and I'm like, okay, so she said that her sons were out there watching things that didn't happen at that time. She has her sons leaving for work at a time that didn't happen either. She has her sons, like on the dispatch audio, you actually hear her sons and law enforcement make contact with them several times. Like they are looking for a person that's dressed in all black. And I think at like 9 something, they mention it on the dispatch audio. Someone comes on and responds that that's the kid that's helping us search, right? So, because she does say that her kids were out there helping search. They literally encountered her and her son several times, as well as I think the husband later on in the day, along with one of the sons in the ATV and the river. So what it seems like is you have a lot of like, what better way to account for your scent or distract from something than to be dressed in the all black, which is everything that Sebastian is last seen in. And also, like, why would you go out dressed in all black? You know what I'm saying? If that was what Ellie is looking for, is a figure in all black, and you look kind of similar, same age, etc. It seems like that would make law enforcement's job harder, because they'd be constantly finding you, just like they were the day that Sebastian went missing and they kept finding him. Then you have the fact that law enforcement told the residents to stay inside at night because they were using that heat sensing radar at night. And according to Bobby's own story, her kids got caught by the police out at night because of the heat sensing radar. Why were we not following directions? I mean, there's just a lot of things that kind of like gave me pause in that story, especially when I added it up and started looking back and comparing it to the timeline of things that are not, biased. A dispatch audio is not biased. A timeline isn't biased. The sequence of events is not biased. And another thing that always like stood out to me that I immediately wrote off in the beginning is the sighting on Hogan's Branch Road. Mm-hmm. It came in at 9:27, I think, on the dispatch audio. What a lady called in, someone wearing like all black with a bag or a rag. It's hard to distinguish if they were saying a bag over its head, wearing sandy blonde hair. And I always wrote that off and thought
Hogan's Branch Road is to the north,
correct,
through the field.
Mm-hmm.
Up here. So you're saying, this is the Proffwitz neighborhood. This is where Sebastian vanished. This is Hogan's Branch Road.
Right. And if you look at this search map, everything distinctly changes. There was one day where everything changes in the grid searches, and they start literally searching Hogan's Branch Road, marking out grid searches off of Hogan's Branch Road, and marking out grid searches on another area as well. And it's like, so I realized one night as I'm going back and listening to that, could that possibly have been a time? Because then you have law enforcement come back on the radio and make the statement that they had made contact with the individual the night before, and that I think that he's in his 20s is what they were, I think, saying. I have the clip down. I'm trying to find it of the Hogan's Branch part. But what that said to me is when the officer came back over the dispatch audio and says, I made contact with him, typically officers aren't going to make contact, like just don't stop people at night unless there's something going on, right? Like you're not just going to drive down the road on patrol at night. And then for him to know the age of the person too, tells me that he probably asked to see some type of identification in order to know the guy's age, and that it was not Sebastian.
If you go to Hogan's Branch Road, their neighborhood is over top, so it's a big hill.
Yes.
Big hill it's wooded all the way down, but kind of shows you the general area. It is woods. I made it this far with searching, and then it turns into fields.
But for a local,
mm-hmm.
if you're a local and you have kids that were brought up in that area that love to get out on their ATV and explore and go into the woods and do all kinds of off-roading in their Jeeps and ATVs, who's gonna know the area better than somebody like that loves to play in the woods and grew up before that area really started getting developed. And I just thought that was really interesting how they started focusing the shift to the Hogan's Branch Road area after, I listened to that dispatch audio a number of times, and I always wrote that off until I started looking at the shift of when law enforcement's grid search changed. I think that was on day 4. But I was just curious as to, because I knew that her sons had met you, and I just didn't know if it ever gave off the almost keeping tabs on vibe, or
her kids. I never got a bad vibe. I spoke to her offline. She seemed like she was genuinely concerned for Sebastian. She went and Sebastian found, and I didn't see anything suspicious at all. My opinion. Everyone has opinions, but I interviewed her. And she's just a neighbor there, and crazy stuff happened in her neighborhood, and she's trying to do her best to create a group just to keep people informed, because there was a lot of neighbors around there rattled. There was a lot of neighbors worried that outsiders, YouTubers, and people with drones up in there, and they never experienced anything like that. So the way I took it, the way she, when I talked to her, and there were a lot of neighbors were scared, traumatized, wondering what's going on. Plus, a lot of them had kids themselves, and they don't think somebody else could go and get their kids snatched or grabbed. So to me, it was just like she was just worried.
All right. Do you remember that
I
Seth
mean,
or
you're
that
entitled to your opinion because you say
right?
you're out there. And you know, I asked you what your theories are, and you're
Yeah.
explaining stuff, or you're explaining and stuff, and all opinions are welcome.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, because I mean, it was listed in this lawsuit that they had cameras, like the Prophets had cameras, and they showed cameras. Those cameras were installed after Sebastian went missing.
True. Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing about the cameras is that what they're saying is, oh, yeah, she does security. Katie, why didn't she have adequate cameras when she does the same type of business herself?
Well, I mean, they said, like, if you want to flip that and reverse it, then we have neighbors saying nothing ever happens there, you know? So typically, why would you need a big camera system in an area where there's nothing that really, like, the most exciting thing was what, someone being busted for drug, like, it changed in your story and when your interview, but there was nothing that really happened eventful, you know?
No
And
place is safe in this country, Nancy Guthrie, Catalina Foothills,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
no one's safe anywhere.
yeah,
You
I
can't
just
do
found that interesting because I recognized a lot of the rumors that were listed in this lawsuit were from that Facebook group. So, and I know who they come back to. So I just was curious.
Sunny Weatherford. Well, I appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for stopping
Thank
by.
you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye-bye.